Welcome everyone to this SAP community call. My name is Melina and I'm part of the community team, your host today. You are joining because you want to hear more about consistent identity access management. And with us is Marco Sommer, who is product manager for security and identity access management, responsible for the SAP Cloud Identity Services. Before we get started, quick housekeeping notes. So we have a chat functionality for you to really exchange with each other, make sure that you address it to panelists and attendees so everyone can see your messages. If you have questions already during the presentation right now already, please feel free to use the Q&A button where we will have time later to address those questions together with Marco. And with that, I'm happy to hand over to you, Marco.
Thanks very much, Nina, for the introduction. And hello also from my side. My name is Marco Sommer. I'm the product manager for the Identity Services. My focus topic is single sign-on for cloud solutions. And today, I wanted to share some insights for you. It's about the integration strategy that SAP established for the intelligent enterprise. And I wanted to take that opportunity to introduce how we intend to tackle that, how we intend to support that with regards to establishing single sign-on for SAP Cloud Solutions. But I did not want to focus only on the product capabilities, but rather focus on critical things that come up during establishing a new solution, how to integrate it into an existing environment. So how do we serve it from our services perspective with regards to authentication single sign-on, but when it comes to the integration, often critical topics are what user identifiers to establish, how do we deal with subsequent system-to-system communication, how does it look like in complex landscapes. I want to tackle a brief demo because we have a very nice feature for strong authentication recently released. It's the web authentication capability. And finally, further information. Also from my side, housekeeping. If you have questions to the content, I try to keep an eye on the chat. We'll try to answer questions in case questions come up on the dedicated topic, but ideally we have questions at the end so that we make it also for the demo part. Okay. SAP's intelligent enterprise strategy. So overall, this is part of a really large activity that we are dealing with. So integration is a top priority for SAP, what we are dealing with, what teams are working on. So you find that also communicated externally with the integration strategy paper that was communicated and with the contents provided from our board. And what we are dealing with today is what do we offer and how do we want to ensure consistent security and identity management. So the question is, in principle, when our customer license an SAP Cloud solution, there's almost always a single sign-on infrastructure in place. And it is relevant even if for a new application, first with separate authentication should be dealt and not integration with corporate single sign-on. So how should it fit this application into the existing environment and how do we intend to tackle that? So a typical environment for B2E scenarios look like this, that on the on-premise side, we do not only have browser-based access, but also native clients like the SAP GUI. And the relevant systems from IAM perspective that we have to consider are the HR system, a corporate user store, often Microsoft Active Directory, an identity provider on top, often MS-ADFS, or already a cloud solution like Azure AD. We have the on-premise application and how to integrate best the SAP Cloud solution. So what we decided for and the clear strategy is to have a default integration with the identity services. So that's what we're driving, where we have a cross-product architecture initiative at SAP to make it possible that ideally all the SAP Cloud solutions integrate with the identity authentication services, providing all the capabilities that are needed on the one side in case we want to allow for authentication in that instance, or in case a single sign-on infrastructure is already in place, to seamlessly integrate with a corporate identity provider. When we look deeper into the capabilities, what the identity services offer, so we offer a wide range of authentication mechanisms. Of course, basic authentication is the bread and butter thing, but in case customers have a PKI infrastructure in place, it works with client certificate. Cabos SP-Neo is often chosen as a seamless way for single sign-on. And we are offering a wide range of multi-factor authentication capabilities, because for the public cloud solutions, strong authentication is a key requirement. And identity authentication offers, besides time-based one-time password tokens, we recently have added support for web authentication, something that I want to show later. We do support RSA or SMS as an option to build to establish that on top. Requires an additional license for the SMS sending functionality. It is also possible to establish with authentication screen coming from IES to let the credentials being validated in a corporate user store with a secure connection via the cloud connector to an on-premise user store. That is in principle the whole area of capabilities that we are offering, how we want to support the integration capabilities. When we look at the integration towards the applications, we see that we are supporting two open standards here, the Security Assertion Markup Language, or OpenID Connect. And this is a key thing for us, that in the identity service for the integration strategy, we want to rely on really open standards to be able to integrate into any existing infrastructure that is there, because we cannot expect that customer has a full-fledged SAP landscape, but we want to be flexible enough to integrate with the customer's environment, where we rely on open standards for seamless integration. Okay, the thing is, the first question already came up, which I want to tackle here right now. It's a question about the licensing and pricing. Our board has decided that the identity service is a very foundational service, a key integration component for SAP Cloud Solutions. That's why the end of last year, we had a decision that the integration and usage of the identity service is for free for any SAP Cloud Solutions that is sold under the general terms and conditions. So in principle, you can use the identity service for any SAP Cloud Solutions that is there. So looking at the examples with SAC, Ariba, SuccessFactors, you can establish IES for those applications, and there's no license for the identity authentication service required. A license would only be required in case you use the identity authentication for a third-party solution or an on-premise solution. So that is still subject to be licensed. But for any cloud solution, including anything that runs on top of a business technology platform, it's free of license. It's a key integration component that we want to offer. So our board decided this is a key integration company. We don't want to charge our customers on that, but make our intelligent enterprise a seamless integration story. Okay, one very important feature that we are offering is that different user types often access one and the same application. Very simple example is here the SAP community. We as SAP employees access the community. Our partners access with their users, as well as external users that can access it with self-registration. And the identity authentication service is very flexible to bring the user. Ideally, the goal is always to establish single sign-on. And the identity authentication service makes it very flexible to decide that some users are sent to partner identity providers. We as SAP employees are sent to our corporate identity provider, whereas external users can validate with basic authentication in identity authentication. In that example, with our SAP ID service, accounts.sap.com, and all the users then have access to the public-facing assets that we as SAP expose. Now, when we look at one critical topic. Some applications that we have at SAP do offer, as of today, basic authentication with a local user store. And so this is something that, of course, from a strategic perspective, we want to get rid of. So this local authentication means should be migrated, ideally to the central service of the Identity Authentication Service. And the question is, how can this be done? Of course, none of the application stores the credentials in plain text. So a simple migration, copying over to central service is not an option. So what is the approach that, for instance, SuccessFactors Basics or LMS have chosen? So the way how we migrate and integrate such a solution for what is called password users is we configure a trust from the Identity Authentication Service to the application for basic credential verification, which we do at the very first time. So the users will be migrated to the Identity Authentication when they log in for the first time. The credentials are validated in the application itself and then taken over. Then the salted hash is generated and the password is taken over. So the next time the user authenticates with username and password, the validation for that user is done based with a local password that the user has in the Identity Authentication Service. So that is a quite seamless integration capability, how we can, without interrupting the business, the access for the users, when an application decides, I want to migrate the authenticating authority to a central service and get rid of the local capability to the customer's Identity Authentication Service tenant. Okay, that is about the way how passwords can be migrated. Keep a brief eye on the questions. Then an additional Cloud Platform Neo account is needed. Okay, that's a question on a previous slide. Let me briefly go back. Quite interesting question here. This corporate user store scenario. The connectivity via the Cloud Connector is indeed necessary. The Cloud Connector runs on a BTP account, and this is indeed must be an account on Neo. This is so far still needed due to the fact that we require a proxy application. So the Cloud Connector established the tunnel towards the on-premise application. And the question is, an additional Cloud Platform Neo account is needed. Is that for free as well? Yes, this is for free. And and our DevOps team can create such an account in case the customer does not have one. So we require a support ticket in order to set up such an account so that the customer can set up the Neo account. And this is, of course, then also for free because we need that proxy. From roadmap perspective, this functionality is something that we want to offer with the possibility to establish the connectivity via the Identity Authentication Service itself, but it's still a roadmap topic. So in the future, this Neo account will no longer be required. Another question that I see is the license model, whether that also applies for the Identity Provisioning Service. So for SuccessFactors, the Identity Provisioning Service is also bundled solution. And yes, this is correct. So this free usage model applies also for the Identity Provisioning Service. So it's not only about single sign-on, but identity lifecycle management is subject as for free when established with the Identity Provisioning Service. Thanks for the questions. Interesting. Okay, we had the topic of password migration. So what other topics, what other critical topics come up? A very common issue is that we have a lot of identifiers being used. And this is with a central service, it is not a problem. We establish based on either the SAML configuration or OpenID Connect. The Identity Authentication Service can always issue the name identifier that an application requires in order to identify the user in its local user store. And such a configuration to send the right identifier can also be established when identity authentication is used as a proxy with a corporate IDP. So we can rewrite the assertion that is sent to the respective application with a dynamic expression. So you can add logical expression and potentially, if required, replace use the name identifier in case the one application requires another one that the corporate identity provider sends. So identity authentication offers a wide range of identifiers depending on the needs of the application, from user ID that identity authentication itself established. And there's one thing, that's the second, the user UUID is something that was recently established and agreed upon that this is a very common and to be supported identifier across the SAP Cloud Solutions, also being beneficial not only for access to the application itself, but we also need to consider that business applications communicate subsequently also programmatically with other services or even other applications. So where we have system-to-system calls, where again, an identifier needs to be sent that subsequent services understand. So, and this is something where we offer in the identity authentication service a uniquely generated value, a user UUID that is very suitable in order to be established as a unique identifier across the various applications, including subsequent services. Okay, and last but not least, also here for the name identifiers, identity authentication offers that as with dynamic values. So again, expressions can be established also to establish something like prefix values and concatenating it with another user profile attribute there. So this is highly beneficial in order to harmonize the integration with various SAP applications which due to historic reasons have different requirements towards the identifiers that are used. Now, what I just mentioned is a very important topic, especially when we're not only talking about the browser-based integration. So it's sending the name, the correct name identifier is quite an easy thing. In case we're just integrating with the identity authentication service, we have a redirect from the application to IS. We have a configuration there. Okay, this application requires the email address as name identifier is being sent, but it is very important to have a look at the whole integration scenario, and that's what the intelligent enterprise is about, the integration story. We must not only see the very first integration, but the integration means this application has integration needs with central services, for instance, an audit log service with workflow inbox and things like that. And here again, entries need to be written to these subsequent services where it is crucial that the user can be uniquely identified. And this is why we are working on a model here, how to seamlessly establish also such a subsequent system-to-system communication with principal propagation. And here the user UUID is a very suitable identifier that can be reused and is suitable to share that and to provide that so that a token-based approach can be established and subsequent services can rely on, okay, this is the correct identifier. And if I, for my service, have to present all the entries for a particular user, then I can rely on the selection, can be based on the user UUID, and then I know all the audit log entries or the workflow inbox entries can be presented for that user. But it's not only about the name identifiers that are there. Also, the question is how to secure such a communication, because one thing is to be avoided for the intelligent enterprise, that we have an arbitrary number of point-to-point trust configurations. So in case we see, this here is a quite simple setup there, but if we imagine that larger customers have, let's say, a dozen or 20, 30 cloud applications, and each of these applications has subsequent 2, 3, 4 services that have to be, that it has to communicate with, then we see that that these trust configurations really explode in the course of time in case we establish point-to-point trust configuration. And such trusts, of course, they have to be secure, but secure means also that the secrets have to be frequently updated, kept up to date from security requirements, and that these trusts need to be renewed. And that's why we are working on, this here is really a roadmap outlook, future functionality to offer a capability so that the application can receive an authentication token that can be reused across such a communication chain in a secure way. So this is something that that we are working on to be able to establish a trust, so that in this example here, service 2 can rely on, it can trust a token that was issued from the identity service for the application at the very beginning. Of course, that requires on the one side, respective setup for mutual TLS, but also the token from the audience perspective. It must be ensured that service 2 can validate, oh yes, this is a token that I can trust and I'm entitled to act on behalf of that token. Otherwise, I would have to reject this request. So this is something that the teams are working on. That's a key activity actually in our architecture community, that this concept is being established. Briefly looking at the question there, I see it's again about the licensing, that for cloud solutions, indeed, the identity authentication service is a prerequisite, whereas for on-premise applications, the license is not included. So this is correct. And this is the way how we have to offer it. So for on-premise application, indeed, this cannot be applied. So the integration with on-premise integration, in case the on-premise integration reaches out to the identity authentication service for authentication, this would be subject to be licensed. The thing is, in case a trust is established that the cloud solution reaches out to the identity authentication service, requests a token, and just this token is forwarded to the on-premise application, and the on-premise application does not reach out to IAS to authenticate the user, then this is of course not license relevant. Yeah, so this is something that one has to consider. But in fact, yes, this is true. On-premise applications as well as third-party solutions are not included in the license, in the free license agreement that we have for SAP Cloud Solutions. Okay. That was about licensing topics. That was, and here we had the topic of principal propagation, what we are working on. And let's have a look at another very common question, especially for large enterprises. So I was in discussion actually with several, and we as SAP, of course, have also very big customers which are acting worldwide. And here a very interesting question is when a company has established a system landscape around the globe, and this here is something that I've seen as quite common, that a 3-region setup is established with business applications where most of the users are working in local business application limited to the region, whereas there are people working in central functions that have to access the various business applications also in other regions. So the majority of users works in regional system with local access. And in such a scenario, of course, when we have to consider latency for authentication, a local identity provider is of course then beneficial in order to avoid latency. Yet still, then the question is, what does it mean for single sign-on? If in case we have 3 different identity providers, one could establish single sign-on with one corporate identity provider and federating with the regional identity providers, or to go the way to establish also from identity authentication perspective this one central identity provider, which then of course makes user lifecycle management, more consistent, and as well as we need to be aware of questions like user unique identifiers that are generated in IES. So this here will ensure that the user UUID is unique with the regional identity authentication service tenant. We have then also specific user UUIDs in the regions. So that may not be a problem because the business applications are also organized in a regional level, but this is something that one has to be aware of. And from a customer perspective, what I've seen so far, that usually our recommendation to establish one central identity authentication service per company is then often followed. Of course, that has for users in other regions some latency effect, but this is something depending on one needs to try it out, what the effect is, how long it takes for remote regions to authenticate. But it's the preferred approach from single sign-on perspective, as well as consistency for identity lifecycle management. Okay, that was actually what I wanted to share with regards to capabilities of our service, the common scenarios, pitfalls that I've seen, often topics that were discussed, that were brought to us from the product team. How can we solve it? What is the best approach to tackle that? And one thing that I'm happy to demonstrate is something, and I think that time still allows, quite happy that we are there, we recently offered support for web authentication as a means for multi-factor authentication. Web authentication is in principle a result of the FIDO initiative. FIDO is an initiative of various companies to establish secure authentication, passwordless authentication. That was actually the goal of the FIDO initiative. And a lot of companies joined this FIDO initiative, and web authentication is the one standard of the World Wide Web Consortium to offer passwordless authentication in a standardized way. And one of the companies that joined this standard is company YubiKey, which offers, for instance, the hardware keys for authentication. This is something that I wanted to demo here. If you have a look at this is such a YubiKey, kind of a hardware token, which can be used as a second factor to authenticate to a demo application. And this is what I'm going to show now in a brief demo to give you an idea how that works with strong authentication capabilities in the identity authentication service. Let me briefly see. We first have a look at the configuration in the identity authentication service. This here is the administration console of an IAS tenant. I have deployed a demo application on BTP, so and it's based on the SAML integration here. And what we can see here, let me briefly check. This is the risk-based authentication. So if you have the trust configuration for that service provider, you have the usual SAML trust configuration. You upload the SAML metadata here, and then in principle, the trust is established. What an administrator can then configure is the so-called risk-based authentication, where rules can be defined which users have to provide stronger means of authentication, or even which users are excluded from access to an application and which users are fine with a first factor only. And here I have configured a rule that users of type employee have to provide a second factor with allowed either web authentication or time-based one-time password tokens, whereas the default action is to allow only web authentication. Now let's have a look at a demo application, how that looks like. This is the demo application for which I just configured the trust. You can see that. Let me make that a little bit bigger. And let's give it a go. So this is my user in the demo tenant. I'm here in the other browser, and you see my user is obviously assigned to the user type employee because I'm offered two different approaches for authentication. What I'm going to do now is I take the YubiKey. I have to enter the YubiKey to my laptop, and then we see we should be able to see once I've chosen that web authentication was chosen. Make sure it's you. Yeah, I have to enter the PIN. An additional secret, and to prevent that I'm a bot, I have to touch the YubiKey, and you see that was the second factor which I had to provide besides username and password. Here for me it was necessary to provide a second factor, and instead of the time-based one-time password token, I decided for my user to do that with a YubiKey. Let's have a look at the configuration if I log out and do the same thing with a different user. And I take the user Nick. Let's take his password. And here I only have the choice to do that with web two-factor authentication. And here, this time, I do that with a fingerprint on my laptop, and you see web authentication provides me again a variety of authentication mechanisms on the client side. So I could establish that with, as mentioned, with a hardware token with a YubiKey. Here Windows 10 supports with Windows Hello and the fingerprint authentication that via the laptop, and that gives us in the identity authentication and our customers, of course, quite a huge flexibility what stronger means of authentication should be established because we see this as a very crucial capability for the intelligent enterprise, that our customers are very flexibly able to protect the access to the cloud solutions. Yeah, and of course, this session was intended not only to have presentation, common scenarios that are there, but also questions and answers. And I'm done with the demo. And I think from presentation perspective, that was also what I wanted to share. If you have a look later on at the presentation, you see also here links where you find further information about the SAP integration strategy, security software, what we are offering, and especially if you're interested in the identity services, identity authentication, and identity provisioning, then this community page here for the identity services is the way to go. Yeah, and with that, I'm done, and we can switch to hopefully again, interesting questions. We already had a few ones.
Thank you, Marco, also for the demo. Yeah, questions are already there. People have been very busy posting questions in the Q&A area, if you may want to have a look. Mm-hmm. It's also possible for attendees to raise their hand to speak up, but I would really let you have a scan through Q&A and get them addressed.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. I think we, during the presentation, I covered for Enable Now and the on-premise integration. Then we were, the next question from Jay was about the support for OAuth 2. Actually, the Identity Authentication Service supports OpenID Connect, which is in principle an add-on to OAuth 2. So any integration scenario where an ID token as the OAuth token is sufficient, then the current capabilities for OpenID Connect will be sufficient. Yeah. What Identity Authentication Service does not offer so far is a generic OAuth token service with a kind of a user approval for a certain authorization. This is something, to be honest, there are vague plans to do that, to offer that in the future as an extension of the current OpenID Connect capabilities, but it's nothing that is targeted for the very near future. But definitely a topic that we are looking at. Also from demand perspective, we have several of our SAP Cloud Solutions that are approaching us. Couldn't that be a capability of the Identity Authentication Service? And this is something that is being considered, but as said, not yet on the short-term roadmap. The next question is about that a customer was provisioned with 2 IDP tenants, one prod and one non-productive. Is there an option to request a 3rd tenant for QA purposes? Yes, this is something that's indeed the default model that we are granting a productive and a non-productive tenant. And we had the requirement actually from some scenarios for a QA tenant, but what is not consistent. We had that in the architecture community, and we decided to stick to the 2-tenant model. It seems to fit for really most of the scenarios. There's one exception. Let me briefly explain that. And the one exception is SuccessFactors BizX. If we look at the intelligent enterprise, SuccessFactors BizX is a very natural system of origin for the employee users. And SuccessFactors offers its customers the possibility to establish more and more BizX instances. Some customers have 5 up to 10. I've seen customers who have more than 10 BizX instances. And if you integrate these BizX instances to the 2 IAS tenants, then it is possible, but from naming convention, from identifiers. Imagine you're using the same email address. You override the users and lifecycle management. If you delete a user, you have the same user with these identifier in various BizX instances. Then the lifecycle might get corrupted. That's why there is a possibility in the SuccessFactors Upgrade Center that a customer can request 1 IAS tenant per BizX instance. That's the only exception that we've gone so far. And beyond that, in case a customer wishes for own needs, it's possible to license additional tenants via the SAP store or via BTP. If you have a BTP CPA account, there's a self-service there to request additional tenants. The next question from an anonymous attendee is the question whether IPS is also free and working with Ariba and SAC. First of all, for free, it's definitely, because Ariba and SAC are also SAP Cloud Solutions. Then, to be honest, I'm not 100% sure about the Ariba connector. I think the Ariba connector is still in work. SAC is definitely, the connector is there. And then to my knowledge, the Ariba connector is still in work. But when it's there and released, you can rely on, yes, the integration here with IPS is also covered and no dedicated license for IPS is needed. The next question from Todor: is the configuration for various web authentication methods second factor in IAS different, e.g. YubiKey versus Windows Hello fingerprint? The thing is, of course, you have to register the authentication method in your profile. And you might have multiple methods. So in my user, I could either use for web authentication the YubiKey or the Windows Hello fingerprint. And both authentication methods will appear in my user profile. So yes, it is different. You have to register the respective method for web authentication, and you will see it in the profile. As far as I know, there's just one thing: the self-service to kick it out is still subject to be in work. If you register a web authentication device in your profile, just check your profile and you see the various methods that are there. And of course, also an administrator can maintain that in case, for instance, YubiKey gets lost or something like that. Administrator definitely can kick out the respective authentication method. So this is already offered. But yes, fully agree and good point. It has to be explicitly registered in your profile. Then we have Richard. How do you set up external token providers in IAS? The question is about token providers, external token providers. So let's first look at it from browser-based single sign-on. In case the Identity Authentication Service acts as a proxy for authentication, this is bound to SAML standard. And then it's usual SAML trust configuration. So the trust has to be established via exchanging the SAML metadata, and then Identity Authentication Service can act as a proxy. But I'm not quite sure whether that was the question. External token provider might also be the question if we have an OIDC token provider as an external authority. And this is something that is currently not yet supported. So identity authentication acting as a proxy for an OpenID Connect identity provider. This is something that cannot be established and set up as of today, but this is something that we are working on, definitely on the roadmap. And this is a topic that is even on the short-term roadmap, although as usually I'm not entitled to give any delivery dates, but this is definitely something that we will support rather soon. Okay, happy to see additional questions coming up. What if we use third-party hyperscalers, e.g., for instance, Google Cloud, to hold S/4HANA solutions, and I want to access other services on SAP Cloud? Will I have to license for it too? The thing is, in case it's an S/4HANA cloud solution, it will reach out to the Identity Authentication Service. It will be treated as an SAP cloud solution. And this is something that is detected on the Identity Authentication Service based on the trust configuration. So we have certain patterns, or the information is provided via our order fulfillment tool during the setup there, that an SAP cloud solution is considered and detected as such an application. And so there, no license is required. You can easily check that if you go to the administration console of your Identity Authentication Service tenant. You see an overview about the so-called bundled logins, which are SAP Cloud Solutions covered via license bundle to any other SAP Cloud solution, versus the non-bundled. These are applications that are not considered recognized as SAP Cloud Solutions, and so they are subject to be charged and require a license. But as said, anything SAP Cloud solution that we have, including anything that runs on top of SAP Business Technology Platform, is subject to be license free.
Marco?
Yes.
An attendee would like to speak up, so I would unmute him.
Sure.
Quick, okay?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
All right, Xiaodong, you can speak up now. I think it should be possible for you.
Sorry, I might.
Oh, here now. Sorry, should work now.
Sorry, I might push the wrong button, but it doesn't want to speak up actually.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Then
Thanks
for clarifying.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, but we still have questions in the Q&A section there. A question from Richard. Is there any built-in two-factor email or SMS support in the Identity Authentication Service? Simple answer is no. The first question about email, yes, this requirement comes from time to time. To be honest, I don't see it as a real second factor. If you consider that you can control the user's password via the forgot password flow via the email inbox of a user. An attacker might access the system, use the forgot password flow. He will receive a reset password email and can control then the first factor. So to be honest, from security perspective, it doesn't make sense to have email as a second factor option. But we have that requirement from several customers who, to be honest, I don't know, someone might feel better if an email is sent with a code. So our product owner thinks about it to offer it, but to be honest, from security perspective, it does not provide additional security means if email is offered as a second factor. With regards to SMS support, whether that is built-in available, no. This is something that we cannot offer due to the fact here SMS are subject to be charged when being sent. This is something I also do not expect this in the future, that we are able to provide this as built-in capability, because here are costs included, and this is something that we cannot provide in principle going beyond the capabilities that that we offer with the free service for identity authentication service. Okay, then like in SAP Secure Logon Server on-prem, that was probably an appendix to the previous question from Richard with the secure login server. I think that was answered with a previous question. If not, please renew the question then if it was not fully answered. Or SAP Authenticator app usage is integrated? Yes, of course. The SAP Authenticator application is definitely, that's our, I would call it default two-factor authentication method for TOTP. I haven't shown that in the demo, but SAP Authenticator, but in principle, any authenticator application that is compliant to a certain RFC standard, so the Google Authenticator or Microsoft Authenticator application can be used, and of course the SAP Authenticator app. So this is then included. But as I said, in case Microsoft Authenticator is established, it's totally fine to use that one, so that the users don't have to bother with multiple authenticator applications on their mobile device.
Yeah, we're actually already at the end of the time. So if there is any pressing question that you would like to address now and cannot wait, then yeah, take maybe the last chance to ask it to Marco. But yeah, of course, Marco and you always have the possibility to exchange in the community. I've shared the topic pages, community.sap.com/topics, where you will find them and be able to address your further questions.
Sure.
Okay. Then.
Yeah, thank you very much for the for really very interesting questions, for attending this session. It was a pleasure to host that session here today. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And we will make the recording slide deck, of course, available in the community, send it to you. You can also connect with Marco on social media as well, right? So Marco, if you would want to share this in chat real quick, then we can call it a community call. All right.